My parents blamed me for my twin's death, so they replaced me with him. My parents forced me to become my dead twin and act as if I never existed. So, I showed them just how alive I really am. My twin brother, Theo, and I were 17 when it happened. I remember the exact moment before our lives diverged forever. We were in the back of an Uber, arguing about something stupid, probably a girl or a video game. I was laughing, and he was pretending to be annoyed, but I could see the smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then the world became a blur of screeching tires and shattering glass. Our intoxicated driver had decided to play chicken with a semi-truck, swerving into the wrong lane at 30 miles over the speed limit. They both died on impact. I woke up in a world of muted beeping and sterile white walls, a world without Theo. I had survived, but the doctors told me I was lucky. Cognitively impaired, they said. Nerve damage in your legs. I couldn't walk properly, my words got tangled on their way out, and my head felt like it was full of cotton. But as I would soon find out, losing my ability to walk and think clearly was the least of my problems. The real horror began when my parents walked into my hospital room. There was no relief in their eyes, no comfort. They looked at me with a cold, simmering disgust, as if I wasn't their son who had just clawed his way back from death's door, but a stranger who had committed an unforgivable crime. I spent 4 days hooked up to a symphony of machines, and they visited only once. Not to hold my hand, not to tell me they loved me, but to congratulate me. That's the word my father used, congratulations. He said it with a voice dripping in sarcasm. According to them, the entire tragedy was my fault. I was the one who called the Uber. I could have seen the driver was drunk. I could have canceled the ride. Therefore, Theo's death was on my hands. They wouldn't listen to reason, to the fact that I was just a kid, that I couldn't have known. Their grief had found a target, and that target was me. They discharged me from the hospital after 7 days, but that 7th day was bizarre. After a week of treating me like a pariah, they suddenly appeared in my room, all smiles and cheerful chatter. It was unsettling. I tried to ask them what had changed, and their answers about being a happy family again and new beginnings sent a shiver down my spine. The words felt hollow, rehearsed. I didn't understand what they were planning, not until we got home. My dad wheeled me through the front door, past my own bedroom with its closed door, and straight into Theo's. My mom was inside, humming a tune as she laid out a set of Theo's old clothes on his bed. His favorite band t-shirt, his worn-in jeans. "This is a new beginning, honey," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. Before I could process the scene, I heard an electric buzzing sound behind me. I tried to turn my head, but Dad's hand clamped down, holding me steady. "Stay still, Theo," he said, his voice flat and commanding. He then took a pair of clippers and began to cut my hair, shearing off my own style and meticulously shaping it into the same neat middle part that Theo had always worn. Gel followed, slicking into place. I felt tears begin to stream down my face, hot and silent. I wasn't crying for the hair. I was crying because I could feel myself starting to disappear. It didn't take long, maybe 2 weeks, for the transformation to be complete in their minds. They stopped using my name altogether. I was Theo. They'd asked me how Theo's friends were doing at school, if I had finished the art project Theo had been working on. They started a purge of the family photos. One evening, I watched from my wheelchair as my father systematically removed every picture of me from the walls and albums, carefully cutting me out of group shots, leaving only the perfect trio of himself, my mother, and Theo. It was a meticulous erasure. All of that was a special kind of hell, a quiet, creeping madness. But then they did something truly unforgivable. They invited Theo's girlfriend, Amy, over for dinner. Amy had been with my brother for 3 years. They were the high school sweethearts everyone knew would get married. They had their whole future planned out. When my mother called her, she framed it as a way to share memories, to help her grieve. Amy, bless her heart, thought it was a sweet gesture from my parents. She arrived with a small bouquet of flowers and a sad, gentle smile. The smile vanished the moment she saw me. I was sitting at the dining table, dressed in Theo's clothes, with Theo's haircut. "Theo, honey, look who's here," my mother chirped, pulling Amy into a hug. Amy's eyes locked on me, wide with a mixture of confusion and genuine horror. I could see her struggling to understand, her brain refusing to process the scene in front of her. The dinner was excruciating. Amy was a ghost at the table, barely speaking, her face pale. I watched her awkwardly shovel food into her mouth, her only goal clearly being to get through the meal and escape. But my parents weren't going to let her go that easily. "Theo, why don't you go sit beside your girlfriend?" "It's rude not to," my father said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Amy flinched as if he'd struck her. I felt my face burn with a shame so intense it was dizzying. "Mom, I'm not." I started, my voice cracking. "Whatever you say, Theo. Honey," she cut me off with a saccharine smile. "Now, be a gentleman and get Amy another glass of water, please." I just stared at her, baffled. How could they be so cruel? Amy saw her opening. She mumbled something about needing the restroom and practically fled from the table. The moment she was out of sight, I heard her footsteps, not walking, but bolting toward the front door. The sound of it slamming shut echoed through the house. I thought, naively, that this would be a wake-up call. that seeing Amy's horrified reaction would force them to see how insane this all was. I was wrong. It only made them worse. The next morning, my dad came in my room, Theo's room, and yanked me out of my wheelchair by my arms. My legs, still weak and unreliable, buckled beneath me. I crumpled to the floor in a heap. He stood over me, his face contorted with rage. "Theo doesn't have leg problems," he yelled, his voice bouncing off the walls. "If you weren't so committed to this stupid wheelchair act, Amy would have stayed last night." He was blaming me for her leaving. He was blaming me for my own injuries. Later that day, my mom found a small stash of painkillers I'd been hiding, the ones the doctors prescribed for the constant, searing nerve pain in my legs. She held the bottle up as if it were poison, then marched to the bathroom and flushed every last pill down the toilet. "My Theo was never a substance addict," she said calmly, as if she were cleaning out a cupboard. I broke. I cried. I begged. I pleaded with them to listen, to see me. I told them I was grieving too, that I missed my brother so much it felt like a physical hole in my chest. They just stared at me with those same empty eyes and left me on the floor, alone and in pain. And then it happened. The final straw. About 10 minutes later, as I was still lying on the carpet, I heard my mother's voice call out from downstairs, bright and cheerful. "Theo, honey, come downstairs. Breakfast is ready." That was the moment Eric died. I gave up. For the next few months, I was Theo. I wore his clothes without a fight. I answered to his name. I even started drawing in a sketchbook, a hobby he had loved and I had never cared for. It was easier than fighting. It hurt less than being the son they hated. Then, one day, a small light flickered in the darkness. I got a message on social media. It was from Amy. "Are you okay?" It read, "I haven't stopped thinking about that dinner. I just feel like something is really wrong." Reading those words, seeing my real name on the screen, felt like a jolt of electricity. It awakened something in me that had been dormant for months. I typed back, my fingers clumsy. I told her everything. The forced identity, the wheelchair, the painkillers, all of it. The messages started flowing back and forth. Soon, she was asking to meet. We met at a park that night, under the pretense of me going for a walk to strengthen my legs. For the first time since the accident, I felt like myself. We talked for hours. We talked about Theo, the real Theo. We shared stories and cried together. But we also talked about me. She encouraged me to find myself again. "You love playing the guitar," she reminded me. "Don't let them take that from you, too." Her words sparked a tiny flame of defiance. The next day, I dragged myself down to the basement and found my old acoustic guitar, dusty and neglected in its case. My hands were clumsy, the nerve damage making the fretwork difficult. My brain felt slow, struggling to remember the chords. But it was something. It was mine. The 6-month anniversary of the accident arrived. My parents, in their twisted logic, decided it was the perfect day to go to a lawyer's office to inquire about legally changing my name to Theo. While they were gone, Amy came over. We sat in the living room, playing guitar together, stumbling through old songs and laughing. We cried about the real Theo, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. Of course, it couldn't last. My parents came home early. They walked in to find us sitting on the floor, my guitar across my lap. But their reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of anger, my mother started gushing. "Oh, I'm so happy to see you two back together," she exclaimed, clapping her hands. My dad just looked at me, a flicker of confusion on his face. "Since when does Theo play guitar?" he asked, not me, but my mom. That was it. Something inside me, something I thought was long dead, finally snapped. "I'm not Theo," I screamed, the words ripping from my throat. "I'm Eric." The fight that followed was explosive. It was a hurricane of accusations and denial. They accused me of seducing my dead brother's girlfriend, of being mentally ill, of trying to destroy their family. Amy, brave Amy, stood her ground, defending me, telling them they were the ones who were sick. They didn't listen. They physically forced her out of the house and slammed the door in her face. Then they turned on me, ordered me to go to my room, Theo's room. For the first time, I refused. I stumbled to my old bedroom, the one that had been kept locked, and barricaded myself inside. My dad pounded on the door, his voice hoarse with rage, demanding I go to Theo's room, but I wouldn't budge. I thought that was the worst it could get. I was so wrong. That night, things got much, much worse. They picked the lock on my bedroom door while I was asleep. They went through my phone, blocking Amy on every platform and deleting her number from my contacts. They took my guitar, the one thing that felt like my own, and I heard them smashing it to pieces in the backyard. That was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke to the sound of sirens. I hurried downstairs as fast as my legs would carry me, and that's when I saw it. My mother, pale and still, was being carried out of the house on a stretcher. She had tried to take her own life. The medics were saying she would need a miracle to survive. My dad, his face a mask of grief, turned to me. He was sobbing, but his eyes were sharp. He grabbed me, hugging me tightly. "Eric," he choked out, using my real name for the first time in months. "Eric, tell me it's going to be okay." He was calling me Eric. In that moment of crisis, the facade had cracked. I just stood there, frozen, watching the paramedics lower my mother into the ambulance. My father's grip on my shoulders was like a vice. He shook me slightly, his tears soaking into my shirt. The neighbors were starting to gather on their lawns, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern, whispering and pointing at our house, the house that was once again the center of a tragedy. "Get in the ambulance," Dad commanded, his voice cracking as he pushed me toward the open doors. "She needs to see you. She needs to know you're here." A paramedic helped me climb inside. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and I struggled with the high step. The inside of the ambulance was a chaotic world of frantic beeps and the hiss of oxygen. 2 EMTs were working over my mother's still form, their movements urgent and precise. Her face was a deathly gray, her lips tinged with blue. One of the paramedics glanced at me, her expression grim, and gestured to a small seat against the wall. "Stay there and hold on tight," she instructed, her attention already back on inserting and 4 into my mother's arm. Dad climbed in right after me, his hand immediately finding my wrist and gripping it so hard it hurt. He leaned in close, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee against my ear. "Tell her you're sorry," he whispered, his voice a low, venomous hiss. "Tell her you're sorry for what you did to us." His fingers dug deeper into my skin. The ambulance lurched forward, the sirens screaming into the morning air. I watched my mother's chest rise and fall in a mechanical rhythm, forced by the ventilator. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open. They weren't hazy or unfocused. They were sharp, and they locked directly onto me. The look in them, the pure, unadulterated hatred, made my stomach clench into a cold, hard knot. Her gaze held mine for 3 long, silent seconds before her eyes rolled back in her head, and her body went limp again. "She's crashing," one of the paramedics shouted, immediately beginning chest compressions. At the hospital, it was a blur of motion. They rushed her through a set of double doors while a nurse directed us to a sterile, impersonal waiting area. Through the small windows and the doors, I could see a swarm of doctors and nurses descending on her gurney. Dad began to pace back and forth like a caged animal, his words a confusing, frantic jumble. He alternated between my name and my brother's, sometimes in the same breath. "Eric, why did you do this?" "No, Theo would never." "Eric, you've destroyed everything." His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. His face darkened. He shoved the phone in front of my face. It was a text from Amy. "I know what happened. I'm on my way." "You did this," he hissed, his eyes wild. "She's coming here because you seduced her. Because you couldn't just be who we needed you to be." 20 minutes later, Amy burst through the emergency room doors, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She spotted us immediately and started toward me, but Dad moved to intercept her, blocking her path. "You need to leave," he said, his voice cold and hard. "This is a family matter. Eric needs support right now." Amy protested, trying to sidestep him. Dad's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. "His name is Theo. Let go of me." Amy yanked her arm free, her voice rising, attracting attention from the nurse's station. "Check his phone history. They've been deleting my messages for months." The commotion brought hospital security. 2 large guards approached, their hands resting on their radios. "Is there a problem here?" the taller one asked, his voice calm but firm. Dad immediately switched gears. His face softened, his voice filled with a practiced concern. He became the grieving, protective parent. "This young woman," he said, gesturing to Amy, "has been stalking my son. She was dating his twin brother, who passed away. My other son here is confused and vulnerable after the accident, and she's taking advantage of him." Amy's jaw dropped. "That's not true. Tell them, Eric. Tell them." I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The stress, the trauma, the cognitive damage from the accident, it was like a dam in my brain. I gestured frantically, trying to explain, but all that came out were stuttered fragments. I'm not. Amy knows." "See," Dad said to the security guards, his voice laced with pity. "He can barely communicate. She's been confusing him, making him think he's someone he's not." The guards exchanged a look. It was clear who they believed. "Ma'am, we're gonna need you to come with us," one of them said to Amy. "This is insane." Amy pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she hit the record button. "Eric is being abused. His father is..." "Ma'am, please come with us to the security office," the guard interrupted, his tone no longer patient. "We need to sort this out." They ended up leading all 3 of us down a long hallway to a small, windowless office. The security supervisor, a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes, gestured for us to sit. "Okay, let's all calm down and someone explain what's happening," she said. Dad launched into his fabricated story immediately. "My son, Theo," he began, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "This is Theo. He's been struggling since his twin brother, Eric, died in the accident. This girl was dating the deceased twin, and she can't accept that he's gone. She's been projecting onto my surviving son, manipulating him. I tried again to speak, to fight back. I lifted my arms to gesture, to plead with them. As my sleeve rode up, it revealed the dark, purple bruises on my wrist from where Dad had been gripping me. The supervisor's eyes narrowed, just for a second. "Sir," she said, her voice even, "how did your son get those bruises?" Dad didn't miss a beat. "He falls frequently, due to his injuries. We do our best to catch him, but Sometimes we grab a bit too hard, try to prevent a worse injury. Those are fingerprint bruises, Amy said, her voice shaking with rage. Eric, show them your other arm. I started to comply, but Dad's hand clamped down on my shoulder, a silent, painful warning. Theo gets confused, he said quickly. The trauma from losing his brother. Stop calling him Theo, Amy shouted. The supervisor held up a hand, silencing them both. She looked directly at me. Young man, she said, her voice gentle. Can you tell me your name? I concentrated, forcing my mouth to form the word. Eric. He thinks he's his dead brother sometimes. Dad jumped in immediately. The doctor said it's a form of survivor's guilt. It manifests as identity confusion. The supervisor studied us all for a long moment. I could see the conflict in her eyes, but Dad's story was just plausible enough. I think it's best if we let the family handle this privately, she said finally, her voice betraying a hint of resignation. Ma'am, she addressed Amy, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. If you return, we will contact the police. Amy stood up slowly, her phone still recording. Eric, I'm not giving up on you, she said, her eyes locking with mine. I'll find a way to help. Dad stood too, positioning himself between us like a human shield. If you contact my son again, I will file harassment charges. He needs to heal without your interference. A security guard escorted Amy out. Dad gripped my arm tightly, guiding me back to the ER waiting room. Through the glass doors, I saw Amy in the parking lot, pacing back and forth as she talked rapidly on her phone, occasionally glancing back at the hospital. She's going to cause more problems, Dad muttered under his breath. He pulled out his own phone and started making calls, building his narrative, reinforcing his lies. Sarah, it's me. There's been an accident. No, your sister. She tried to. Yes, we're at the hospital now. He walked a few feet away, but I could still hear his voice, a chameleon changing its colors with each call. To some relatives, my mom had accidentally taken too many sleeping pills. To others, she'd had a complete breakdown over Theo's death. Each version of the story painted him as the devoted, suffering husband and me as the troubled, unstable son who had driven her to the edge. A doctor in blue scrubs emerged from the ER. Family of Patricia Morrison? Dad rushed over, dragging me with him. How is she? Is my wife okay? She's stable for now, the doctor said, his face grim, but she's in critical condition. We've moved her to the ICU. The next 24 hours will be crucial. The doctor's eyes fell on me. Is this your son? Yes, Dad said firmly, his grip on my arm tightening. This is Theo. The doctor frowned slightly, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, but he didn't challenge it. You can see her briefly, one at a time. Dad went in first. I slumped into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, my legs throbbing without my pain medication. Through the window, I watched the parking lot, hoping to see Amy's car return, a desperate, foolish hope. When Dad came back out, his eyes were red-rimmed, his performance of the grieving husband complete. Your turn, Theo, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Go tell your mother you love her. I dragged myself down the hallway to the ICU. The air was cold and smelled of antiseptic. Mom was surrounded by a web of machines, tubes, and wires running in and out of her. Her chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of the ventilator. I stood there, paralyzed, unsure what to say to the woman who had tried to erase me from existence. A nurse touched my shoulder gently. You can talk to her, she said kindly. Sometimes they can hear. I leaned closer, my mouth near her ear. Mom, I whispered, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. It's Eric, your son, Eric. Her eyes snapped open, and once again, they were filled with that same bone-chilling hatred. Her hand twitched, her fingers clawing at the air as if trying to reach me, to scratch me. The monitors beside her bed started beeping faster, more urgently. I think you should go, the nurse said quickly, her eyes on the flashing numbers. Back in the waiting room, Dad was on the phone again, orchestrating the next phase of his plan. Yes, we'll need to make arrangements. No, Theo is handling it well. Yes, just like his brother would have wanted. Hours crawled by. Eventually, Dad decided we should go home, promising we'd return in the morning. The drive was silent, filled only by his occasional muttering about Amy and her interference. At home, he guided me straight to the kitchen and sat me down in Theo's usual chair at the table. We need to maintain normalcy, he said, his voice regaining its authoritative tone. Your mother would want that. He heated up some leftover casserole and placed it in front of me. I stared at it, my appetite completely gone. Dad sat across from me, his eyes boring into me. Tomorrow, we'll deal with the Amy situation properly, he said. But tonight, you need to remember who you are. You're Theo. You've always been Theo. I pushed the plate away. Dad, don't. He cut me off, his voice sharp as a razor. Not tonight. Your mother is fighting for her life because you couldn't just be what we needed. He stood up abruptly, grabbed my plate, and scraped the contents into the sink with a clatter. Go to your room. Theo's room. I pulled myself up using the edge of the table, my legs shaking with exhaustion and pain. As I passed the living room, I noticed something had changed. The family photos on the mantel had been rearranged again. Now, there were duplicates of Theo everywhere, some of them clearly photoshopped to show him at ages he had never reached, creating a fictional timeline of a life that was never lived. I made my way upstairs, each step sending a jolt of pain through my damaged nerves. The photoshopped images of my brother seemed to watch me, their eyes following me up the stairs. My old bedroom door stood open. The entire lock mechanism had been removed, leaving fresh scars in the wood where Dad had pried out. Inside, more of my life had been purged. The few remaining clothes of mine that had been in the closet were gone, replaced entirely by Theo's wardrobe. The walls were now covered with his artwork, his track and field trophies, his entire life on display. Even the sheets on the bed had been changed to his favorite navy blue set. I collapsed onto the bed, utterly defeated. The house settled into a tense, uneasy quiet. Through the thin walls, I could hear Dad moving around his bedroom, the sound of drawers opening and closing. Then, I heard his footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, and heavy. He appeared in my doorway, a small orange prescription bottle in his hand. "Your mother's sleeping pills," he said, shaking them so the pills rattled inside. The doctor prescribed these for her after Theo died. She couldn't sleep, kept having nightmares about the accident. He set the bottle down on the nightstand beside the bed. "Maybe they'll help you rest," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "Help you think more clearly." The implication hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. Take the pills voluntarily, or he would find another way. My hand trembled as I reached for the bottle. I twisted the cap off, tipped the pill in my palm, and pretended to put it in my mouth, palming it instead. I took a gulp of water from the glass he'd brought. Dad watched my every move, his eyes narrowed. He watched until I swallowed. Then he nodded, satisfied. "Good night, Theo," he said. "Tomorrow will be better." He pulled the door closed. A moment later, I heard a heavy scraping sound in the hallway. He was dragging the large, solid oak bookshelf from its place against the wall and positioning it directly in front of my door. I wasn't just locked in, I was barricaded. I spit the pill out into my hand and hid it deep inside my pillowcase. My phone was gone, of course. The old landline jack in Theo's room had been disconnected months ago. I was completely cut off. I lay there in the darkness, my mind racing, listening to the sounds of the house, trying to formulate a plan. Amy was out there. She was trying to help. Mrs. Chun, our elderly neighbor, had been watching our house with a concerned look ever since the accident. People knew something was wrong. I just had to survive until one of them could act. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by sound from downstairs. It was Dad's voice, low and urgent on the phone. I slid off the bed and pressed my ear to the cold wooden floor, trying to catch fragments of the conversation. "Need to move quickly?" "Yes, the papers are ready." "She's still unconscious, but I understand the risks." Footsteps on the stairs sent me scrambling back into bed. The bookshelf scraped aside, and the door creaked open. Dad peered in, his silhouette framed by the hallway light, checking to see if I was asleep. I forced my breathing to stay deep, and even until he retreated, scraping the bookshelf back into place. Morning came far too soon. Dad appeared with a tray of breakfast and more pills. He watched me like a hawk as I took them. This time, I couldn't fake it. He made me open my mouth, checked under my tongue, and forced me to drink a full glass of water. The medication hit me quickly, making everything feel fuzzy and distant, but not enough to miss what came next. "Get dressed," he ordered, laying out an outfit on the bed. "We're going to see your mother. Then we have some appointments." The clothes were Theo's nicest suit, the one he had worn to his junior prom. I struggled into them while Dad watched, meticulously adjusting the collar, smoothing the sleeves. He produced Theo's watch and fastened it around my wrist with an almost reverent care. "Perfect," he murmured, a strange look of satisfaction on his face. "Just perfect." The drive to the hospital passed in a medicated haze. Dad kept up a steady stream of conversation, addressing me only as Theo, recounting our memories, how we had learned to ride bikes together, how proud we were when Mom got her promotion, how we had always been the perfect family. At the ICU, Mom was still unconscious but stable. Dad spoke to her as if she could hear every word, telling her how well Theo was doing, how he was finally accepting who he was meant to be. The nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. After 15 minutes, Dad announced, "We have to go. Theo has an appointment with a Dr. Catherine." I didn't know any Dr. Catherine. He guided me through a series of unfamiliar hospital corridors to a different wing entirely, the psychiatric ward. A cold dread washed over me as we checked in at a secure desk. Dr. Catherine was a thin woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. She specialized in identity disorders. Dad, it turned out, had already briefed her extensively. She addressed me as Theo from the moment I sat down, asking about my memories, my feelings about losing Eric. I tried to correct her, to explain the truth, but the words came out as a jumbled, incoherent mess. The medication, combined with my existing cognitive issues, made it nearly impossible to articulate a complex thought. Dad sat beside me, patiently translating my fragmented attempts at speech. "He's been very confused since the accident," he explained smoothly. "Sometimes he thinks he's Eric. It's a coping mechanism," his previous doctor said. Survivor's guilt manifesting as identity replacement. Dr. Catherine took notes, nodding sympathetically. It's not uncommon in cases of twin loss, she said, her voice clinical and detached. The surviving twin may feel they need to become both people to keep their sibling's memory alive. That's not. I'm not. I struggled to form the words. It's okay, Theo, she said gently, completely misinterpreting my distress. We're going to help you work through this confusion. Your father has arranged for regular sessions. The appointment lasted an hour. By the end, I realized with a growing sense of horror that Dad had found the perfect professional ally. Dr. Catherine genuinely believed she was treating a grieving, confused twin. Every protest I made, every attempt to assert my own identity, only served to reinforce her diagnosis. Back in the car, Dad was smiling. She's very good, he said. Came highly recommended. 3 sessions a week to start. Our next stop was a sterile professional legal office. Dad left me in the car with the windows cracked like a dog. Through the windshield, I watched him inside, signing papers, shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit. He returned carrying a thick manila folder. Just some paperwork, he said casually, tossing the folder onto the passenger seat. Nothing for you to worry about, Theo. The final stop was the worst. The DMV. Dad presented a stack of paperwork to the clerk at the counter. The woman looked confused as she typed my information into her computer. I show an Eric Morrison at this address, sir. Not a Theo, she said. There's been a terrible mix-up since the accident, Dad explained, his voice filled with a practiced weariness. He slid a sheaf of official-looking documents across the counter. My son Theo survived. Not Eric. The hospital made an error in their initial reports. We've been trying to correct it everywhere. The clerk examined the papers. There was a death certificate amendment. There were doctor's notes, signed by a name I didn't recognize. There was a legal affidavit. All of them declaring that Theo Morrison had survived the accident, and Eric Morrison had not. My hands were shaking. I tried to speak up to tell her it was a lie, but Dad's grip on my shoulder was like iron. He's still recovering, Dad said to the clerk, his voice full of apology. The trauma makes it hard for him to communicate. They took my photo. They printed a new ID card. I watched as my face appeared under my dead brother's name. How Mauditson. Eric Morrison was officially, legally, dead. The drive home was silent. I stared at the plastic card in my hands, and my own face labeled with a lie. Dad hummed contentedly beside me, satisfied with his morning's work. When we got home, there were workers at the house. They were installing something on my bedroom windows. Decorative bars, Dad explained. For aesthetic purposes. To match the historical character of the house, he said smoothly. They looked exactly like the security bars I'd seen on ground floor windows in bad neighborhoods. Mrs. Chun was in her yard, pretending to garden, but I knew she was watching the installation with a deep frown on her face. She caught my eye and mouthed something I couldn't make out. Dad noticed and stepped between us, waving cheerfully. Afternoon, Mrs. Chun. Just some home improvements. She didn't wave back. Inside, Dad showed me the new schedule he had created and pinned to the refrigerator. It was a minute-by-minute plan for my life. Doctor appointments, therapy sessions, family time. Every moment was accounted for. There was no mention of school. Apparently, Theo was taking a gap year to process his grief. We'll get through this together, Dad said, patting my back. You'll see. Soon, you won't even remember wanting to be anyone else. The pills he gave me that afternoon made the rest of the day blur into a surreal nightmare. He had me practice Theo's signature over and over again until my hand cramped. He played old home videos of Theo on a loop, pointing out mannerisms and facial expressions that I should adopt. When I started to doze off, he would wake me to take more medication. Dinner was Theo's favorite meal, spaghetti with meatballs. He had even bought the same brand of soda that Theo preferred. He watched every bite I took, correcting the way I held my fork, reminding me that Theo was left-handed when he ate. I wasn't. I struggled to adapt, dropping food, fumbling with the utensils. Dad's patience wore thin. You're not trying, he accused, his voice sharp. Theo would try harder. After dinner, he had me sit silently in the living room while he called her relatives. Each conversation was a masterful performance. He described how well Theo was doing, how therapy was helping, how grateful we were for everyone's support. I sat there, trapped in a medicated fog, a prop in his elaborate play. Around 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. Dad frowned, not expecting anyone. He peered through the peephole, and his face went carefully neutral. He opened the door partway. It was 2 police officers. Officers, he said calmly. Can I help you? We're following up on a welfare check request, sir, the older officer said. We need to speak with an Eric Morrison. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Dad said smoothly. My son Eric died in a car accident 7 months ago. I'm here with my surviving son, Theo. The officers exchanged a glance. Sir, we have conflicting reports. We need to see your son. Dad hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Of course. Theo is right here. He's been struggling with some confusion since the accident. Survivor's guilt. His doctor says it's quite common. The officer stepped inside, and their eyes fell on me. The younger one looked familiar. I realized he had been one of the officers who responded to the original accident scene. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in my appearance. Son, can you tell us your name? The older officer asked. I opened my mouth, fighting through the thick fog of the medication. Dad's hand landed on my shoulder, squeezing in a silent warning. I started, then forced the words out. Eric. I'm Eric. He's confused. Dad interjected quickly, pulling a business card from his wallet. His psychiatrist, Dr. Catherine, can explain everything. She's treating him for identity confusion following his twin's death. The officers took the card, but the younger one kept his eyes on me. Those bars on the bedroom windows, he said, are those new? Just installed today, Dad confirmed with a sad smile. Decorative, of course. But Theo's been having nightmares, sleepwalking. It's for his safety. Can we speak to him privately? The older officer asked. Dad's grip tightened. I prefer to stay. He gets agitated when he's confused. The last time, he hurt himself. But the officers insisted. Reluctantly, Dad moved into the kitchen, though I could feel him hovering just out of sight. The younger officer sat across from me, his voice low. I remember you from the scene of the accident, he said quietly. You look different. Not as healthy. What's happening here, son? I tried to explain. I told him about the pills, the ID change, the doctor, the constant correction. But the words were tangled, disjointed. Are you taking this medication voluntarily? He asked. I shook my head, then nodded, then shook it again. It was complicated. Dad didn't hold me down and force the pills down my throat, but refusing was not an option. The officer made a few notes. Has anyone hurt you physically? I started to pull up my sleeve to show him the bruises, but Dad reappeared in the doorway. Officers, I think this is upsetting him. As you can see, he's well cared for. He's fed, clothed, and receiving the best medical attention. His mother is in the ICU. We're all under a tremendous amount of stress. What happened to his mother? The older officer asked. Dad's face crumpled with practiced grief. She attempted to take her own life. The loss of Eric, it was too much for her. That's why I'm being so careful with Theo. I can't lose anyone else. The story was perfect. It was tragic. It was believable. The officers softened visibly. They asked a few more questions, took some more notes, and then prepared to leave. As they were walking out, the younger officer turned back to me. If you need anything, he said directly, you can always call. He handed me a card. We all knew I couldn't. I had no phone, no privacy, no way to reach out. Dad immediately pocketed the card after he closed the door. That was unfortunate, he said coldly, his brief performance over. Amy's doing, I assume. We'll have to be more careful. He increased my medication dosage that night. I fought to stay conscious, to hold on to the last vestiges of myself, knowing that with every pill, with every passing day, I was losing more of who I was. Through my new window bars, I could see Mrs. Chen's house. Her living room light stayed on unusually late. I wondered if she was watching, waiting, planning something. The next morning, Dad woke me early. It was time for my therapy session with Dr. Catherine. I could barely walk. I was over-medicated and exhausted. He had to practically carry me to the car. You need to do better today, he warned, his voice low. Show her you're making progress. Show her you're accepting who you are. But I couldn't. In the session, I fought back. I slurred out the name, Eric, every time she called me Theo. Dr. Catherine took careful notes, occasionally glancing at Dad with a look of concern. He seems more resistant today, she observed. Has anything changed? The police came by last night, Dad admitted. Someone made a false welfare check request. It agitated him, brought back all the confusion. I see, she said, adjusting her glasses. Theo, do you understand why people are worried about you? Not. Theo, I managed to get out. This level of resistance is concerning, she told Dad after I had failed another one of her diagnostic questions. We might need to consider a more intensive treatment approach. There's an excellent inpatient program at Northwood that specializes in identity disorders. Dad leaned forward, his interest peaked. Inpatient, a few weeks in a structured environment, proper medication management, intensive daily therapy. It could help him break through this fixation on being Eric. They discussed my future like I wasn't even in the room, planning my erasure in cold, clinical terms. I tried to protest, but my words came out as meaningless sounds. The medication was winning. After the appointment, Dad drove to a pharmacy across town, not our usual one. He went in alone and returned with a bag full of new bottles, different colored pills. Dr. Catherine adjusted your prescriptions, he explained. These should help with the confusion. As we pulled into our street, I saw Amy's car parked a few houses down. Dad saw it too, and his jaw tightened. He hurried me inside, double-locking the door behind us. Within minutes, his phone rang. I could hear his side of the conversation. No, she can't see him. I don't care what she claims. This is harassment. Yes, I'll file the charges. Through the living room window, I saw Amy on the sidewalk, arguing with someone on her phone. She looked up and saw me. She waved frantically. I raised my hand slightly before Dad yanked me away from the window. You will not communicate with her, he snarled. She's poison. She's a reason you're so confused. He made me take the new pills immediately. These are different, stronger. Within an hour, I could barely keep my eyes open. Dad settled me on the couch, the television flickering with more of Theo's home videos. His voice, his laugh, his life playing on a constant loop while I drifted in and out of consciousness. Watch and learn, Dad instructed from his armchair. Remember who you are. The doorbell rang again. Through my haze, I heard Dad arguing with someone at the door. It was Amy's mother, her voice sharp and threatening legal action. Dad's responses were calm, controlled, mentioning harassment, restraining orders, medical privacy. The door closed firmly. Time became elastic, stretching and snapping. Hours or minutes passed between blinks. Dad fed me soup at some point. More pills. More water. The videos kept playing. Theo at birthday parties. Theo at school events. Theo alive and laughing and being everything I was supposed to become. Night fell. Dad helped me upstairs, my legs barely functioning. The bars on my window cast prison-like shadows across the walls. He tucked me into bed like a small child, smoothing the covers. Tomorrow we're going to see a specialist about the inpatient program, he said, his voice soft. It's for the best, Theo. You'll see. He left the door open. There was no point in closing it with the bookshelf back in place. I lay there, fighting the heavy pull of the medication, trying to think. Inpatient. That meant locked wards, no visitors, complete and total control. I would disappear entirely. Through the fog, I heard a sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It took an enormous effort to turn my head. At my barred window, a figure stood in the darkness. It was Mrs. Chun. She was holding up a piece of paper. On it, in large, black letters, were 4 words. Blink if you need help. I blinked. I blinked frantically, desperately. She nodded, her face grim in the moonlight. She held up another sign. Tomorrow. Be ready. Then she was gone. Be ready for what? How could I be ready for anything when I could barely move or think? Sleep finally pulled me under, but not before I heard Dad on the phone one last time, making arrangements. Yes, tomorrow afternoon. For the evaluation and possible admission. Yes, I have all the documentation. Morning arrived with Dad already dressed and organized. He was packing a small suitcase. Just in case the evaluation leads to an immediate admission, he explained. Take your pills, he ordered, holding out the new cocktail. He watched me swallow each one, but something felt different about them. The colors were right, but they felt lighter in my mouth, almost chalky. I swallowed them anyway. I had no choice. We ate breakfast in silence. Dad kept checking his watch, anxious about the timing. The facility, he explained, was 2 hours away. In the bathroom, I splashed water on my face and realized something was wrong. Or rather, something was right. The pills weren't hitting me. My head felt clearer than it had in weeks, not worse. Back in the kitchen, Dad was loading the suitcase into the car. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Chun in her garden, watching. When our eyes met, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Time to go, Dad announced, returning for me. This is a good thing, Theo. You're finally going to get the help you need. He guided me toward the front door, his hand firm on my elbow. I moved slowly, playing up the groggy effects of the medication I should have been feeling. As we reached the driveway, everything happened at once. Amy's car screeched around the corner, blocking the end of our driveway. Mrs. Chun emerged from her house, not alone, but with 2 other neighbors. A large, unfamiliar van pulled up behind Dad's car, boxing him in. What the hell is this? Dad's grip tightened painfully on my arm. Amy jumped out of her car, followed by her mother and a woman in a professional suit holding a clipboard. The neighbors formed a loose, silent circle around us, their phones out and recording. Mr. Morrison, the woman in the suit, called out, her voice calm but authoritative. I'm Victoria Peters from Adult Protective Services. We need to speak with you about your son, Eric. His name is Theo. Dad shouted, trying to pull me back toward the house, but the van blocked our path. We have significant documentation suggesting otherwise, Victoria continued, approaching slowly, including affidavits from several neighbors about concerning behavior. Mrs. Chun stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. I replaced his pills last night, she announced. With vitamins. I've been watching this family for months. I've been documenting everything. Dad's face went from white to red in an instant. You broke into my house? That's illegal. So is false imprisonment, identity theft, and elder abuse. Amy's mother countered, stepping up beside Victoria. We have Eric's original birth certificate, his medical records from before and after the accident, everything proving who he really is. Dad yanked me harder, trying to retreat to the house, but more neighbors had gathered, blocking that path too. We were surrounded by a silent wall of witnesses. This is kidnapping. Dad screamed, his eyes wild. I'm calling the police. Please do, Victoria said calmly. We've already notified them about the situation. They're on their way. I could feel Dad's control slipping, his carefully constructed reality crumbling under the weight of this prepared, coordinated intervention. They had planned this. The pills, the timing, the witnesses, everything designed to catch him in the very act of taking me away. Eric, Amy called out to me. Tell them your name. Your real name. Dad's hand clamped over my mouth, but I twisted away. For the first time in months, my head was clear enough, my will strong enough. My name, I said, my voice shaking but loud, is Eric Morrison. This man has been forcing me to pretend to be my dead brother, Theo. The words broke something in him. He shoved me away, hard enough that my weak legs gave out, and I fell to the driveway. Amy rushed forward to help me as he retreated, pointing a shaking finger at all of them. "You don't understand," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I was saving him. Eric is the reason Theo is dead. He's the one who should have died." Victoria was already on her phone, updating the incoming police. Mrs. Chun knelt beside me, checking for injuries. "I've been watching since that dinner with Amy," she said quietly. "Your mother, she told me weeks ago what was happening. She asked me to watch out for you. I'm so sorry it took so long to act." Dad had reached the house and slammed the door. Through the windows, we could see him moving frantically inside, probably destroying evidence. It didn't matter. Too many people had seen too much. The sound of police sirens grew closer. Amy held my hand while her mother spoke with Victoria about emergency custody arrangements. The neighbors maintained their vigil, ensuring Dad couldn't escape. "It's over," Amy whispered. "You're safe now." But I knew it wasn't that simple. Dad had documents, a doctor, a legal paper trail declaring me dead. The truth would take time to untangle. The police arrived in force, 3 cars, lights flashing. They established a perimeter while an officer with a megaphone called for Dad to exit the house peacefully. "Paramedics, check me over. We need to take you in for an evaluation," one of them said gently. "Standard procedure after medication tampering and potential abuse." I nodded, exhausted but clear-headed as they helped me onto a gurney. Just then, I saw movement in the house. Dad appeared at an upstairs window, my window. He'd managed to pry one of the decorative bars off and was trying to squeeze through. He's attempting to exit from the second floor, an officer radioed. He made it halfway out before getting stuck, dangling there, screaming about his rights, about Theo, about the injustice of it all. It would have been comical if it wasn't so pathetic. They got him down eventually, in handcuffs, still insisting to anyone who would listen that my name was Theo. As the police car pulled away with him inside, I felt something in my chest release, a pressure I didn't even know I was holding. The performance was over. I could stop pretending to be dead. "I'll follow you to the hospital," Amy promised as the ambulance doors closed. The ride was different this time. No one demanding apologies. No one insisting on false names. Just concerned professionals using my real name, asking about my real medical history, treating me like I existed. The next few weeks were a blur of hospitals and lawyers' offices. The withdrawal from the cocktail of psychiatric drugs Dad had been feeding me was brutal. I shook uncontrollably, sweated through hospital gowns, and felt like my skin was crawling. But through it all, Amy was there. And on the 3rd day, Aunt Sarah arrived, my dad's sister. She took one look at me and burst into tears, pulling me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and fresh laundry like safety. She signed the emergency custody paperwork without a moment's hesitation. The police and the district attorney's office built their case. They found Dad's journals. He had documented everything. His plans, his justifications, his descent into madness. It went back months, even before my mother's suicide attempt. They found hidden cameras in my room, recordings of him coaching me to be Theo. The identity theft was extensive. He'd been transferring my Social Security disability benefits, my college fund, everything into accounts under Theo's name. He was planning to have me committed permanently and live off my identity. My mother woke up. When I walked in her ICU room, she looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, and whispered my name. "Eric, my Eric, I'm so sorry." She told me she had tried to stop him, that she had been too weak, too scared, but that she never, ever forgot who I was. Our relationship would be a long, complicated road to repair, but for the first time, it felt like it was real. My recovery was slow. Physical therapy to rebuild the atrophied muscles in my legs. Cognitive therapy to undo the damage from the accident and the drugs. Psychological therapy to process the trauma of being systematically erased by my own family. There were small victories. Standing on my own for 30 seconds. Walking 10 feet with a cane. Picking out my own clothes for the first time in almost a year. A simple act that felt revolutionary. Dad's trial was a circus. His lawyer argued for an insanity defense, claiming grief had driven him to it. But the evidence of his meticulous planning was overwhelming. I had to testify. I had to sit in that courtroom, look him in the eye, and tell the world what he had done. I told them everything, my voice shaking but steady. When I was done, I looked at the jury, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a survivor. He was found guilty on all charges: false imprisonment, identity theft, fraud, abuse. The judge called his actions a monstrous betrayal of parental trust and sentenced him to the maximum term. I live with Aunt Sarah now. My mom is in a long-term care facility, recovering both physically and mentally. We talk on the phone, and sometimes the mother I remember from before the accident shines through. Amy and I are still close. We're not a couple. That would be too weird. But she's my best friend, the anchor that held me steady in the storm. I still have a long way to go. The scars, both visible and invisible, are still there. But every morning, I wake up in a room that is mine, put on clothes that I chose, and look in the mirror. I see a boy with tired eyes and a crooked smile, a boy who is still learning to walk again, both literally and figuratively. And I say my name out loud. Eric, it's a reminder, a promise. I am alive. I exist. And no one will ever take that away from me again.